Hey guys, this is MTG Degree and my name is Luke, and this is the second part of our turn structure video series. And so now we're in combat, which I think is everyone's favorite part of Magic, unless you play Control. And alright guys, so we are pausing the video because I forgot to mention this, which is that during the entire combat step, we are only concerned with instants and cards that have flash, okay? So no sorceries, enchantments, anything like that. Alright, on with the video. So the first step is the beginning of combat step. And the important thing about this is that activated abilities go on the stack immediately. So think to yourself, Rabble Master, alright? It will immediately make that token. So hypothetically, if you say, I pass priority main phase 1, and then your opponent says, I pass priority main phase 1, then beginning of combat immediately starts and that Rabble Master thing goes off. So they no longer have the ability to say, I am going to kill your Rabble Master before it makes a token, because that actually had to happen on main phase 1. And this is kind of a small thing, and in F&M and that kind of thing, you'll pretty much always let your opponent do it, and then just let them know how that turn structure works. That way, everyone learns, you know? And that's my favorite part about F&M, is learning more. And so, just be aware, like, if you're at a tournament, there is absolutely no problem with saying, yeah, main phase 1 is over, so I get my Rabble Master token, and it cannot be removed, right? In tournaments, it's not only your deck and your ability to play, but it's your knowledge of the game that wins you games. Anyway, after the activated abilities go on the stack, then the active player gets priority. And that's for whatever they want to do, and then after they've done something or not, then their opponent gets priority, and then the beginning of combat phase ends. So the next phase is the declare attacker step. So the active player basically declares things as attacking, right? And those things that he is declaring as attacking must have haste, or they have to be in play continuously since the beginning of their turn. So if it gets flickered out somehow and then comes back, then it is once again summoning sick and can't attack, even if it was only off the battlefield for like a millisecond, right? Then you declare where each of your creatures is attacking. So you say, okay, my Rabble Master is attacking that Planeswalker, and all the tokens are attacking you. That kind of thing. And the possibilities are multiple opponents and Planeswalkers. Then you have to make sure that your attack doesn't break any restrictions. So, for example, Crawl Space is a restrictive card to your attack step, and so you are not allowed to break it. Then banding is declared, and who cares? After banding is declared, then triggers that go on the stack during attacks go on the stack. And this is really important because this is why Alacia plus Ankle Shanker doesn't work, because when Alacia brings in Ankle Shanker, he is brought in attacking. He never attacked. And so Alacia's trigger is going on to the stack, and then the stack completely empties, and then Ankle Shanker is brought on, right? So he doesn't get to attack because it's now after that step where attackers are declared. Then the active player gets priority for whatever instant or whatever they want to cast. If no attacks occur during this step, then you skip directly to the end of combat step. So there's no declaring blockers, blah, blah, blah. Alright, so the next step is the declare blockers step. And the first thing you do is declare blockers, unsurprisingly. And you say, you know, this guy is blocking this guy, this guy is blocking this guy. And let's use in this example Humble Defector as your blocker. Then you check for restrictions. So for example, on Meringue River Prowler, his restriction is, towards the blocking player, that he is unblockable. So then, if any of your blocks are illegal, then you go back and you redeclare blocks. Then you check for requirements, so for example, Deadly Lure. And then if your blocks are illegal, then you go back and you reblock. After all of your blocks are legal, then you pay costs. So if anything requires you to pay a cost to block it or anything like that, you pay it at that time. Then the active player chooses the assignment order. So he says, I want this thing to be first, and then that card, and then that card, and so on and so forth, as far as which things his creature is doing damage to first. And in this, you have to be aware of what's lethal damage, okay? So for example, if I have a 6/7 Trampler with Death Touch, and you block it with 6 creatures, it's going to assign 1 damage to the first one, 1 damage to the second one, and they all count as lethal damage because it has Death Touch, okay? Then, after this, abilities go on the stack. So, an example is Bestial Fury versus Cave Tiger. So, Bestial Fury says that the creature gets extra attack when it's blocked, alright? So, as soon as it's blocked, the trigger happens, right? However, Cave Tiger is differently. When it says when it's blocked by a creature, it gets +1/+1. So every time that it's blocked by a creature, it gets +1/+1. So a Cave Tiger, if you attempt to block it with infinite number of 1/1 tokens, will grow +1/+1 for every token blocking it. This is the difference between becomes blocked and becomes blocked by a creature. Alright? Then, after those abilities go on the stack, and the stack empties, then active player gets priority, alright? So in the example of where you're blocking with Humble Defector, then after the attacker has used his priority, you can activate Humble Defector, draw your 2 cards, they get Humble Defector, and then combat damage happens next, which is what we're about to talk about. So, the first thing that happens is the active player declares how their creatures are doing damage, okay? So they can choose to, in the Trample Death Touch example, either hit the first creature with all 6 damage, if they're not doing it right, or they can assign 1 damage to each thing and trample on and on and on. And they must deal damage, lethal damage, to each creature in line. So if they're attacking with a vanilla creature and you Giant Strength on the first one that they have to assign lethal damage to, you can protect all the creatures behind it. Then, defending players choose how their creatures are assigning damage. And in this case, usually, they're only assigning damage to the one creature that they're blocking, because that's how blocking normally works. However, if they have something like Brave the Sands, where they can block 2 creatures, then they have to have assigned the blocking order, like I'm blocking this one, and then I'm blocking that one, right? Well, I'm dealing damage to this one when I block, and then this one. So then they have to deal lethal damage to one, and then they get to move to the second one, and deal whatever damage they can. A thing to note with this damage assignment is that creatures never pull their punches. So if a 6/7 is attacking and gets blocked by a 1/1, it does 6 damage to the 1/1. It doesn't do 1 damage. So whenever there's a trigger or something that cares about how much damage is being dealt, the creatures are dealing their full power regardless of how much toughness the blockers have. Then all damage occurs simultaneously. So an example is with lifelink. So if something is dealing lifelink damage and you are going below 0 except one of your creatures also lifelinked, then you never went below 0 because everything happened at once, including you gaining life from the lifelink. Now, in the case that you have a creature that has first strike or double strike, then those creatures that have first strike and double strike deal their damage first, and then creatures that do normal speed damage, I guess you could say, deal their damage. So there's 2 damage steps, instead of it all being simultaneous. Then abilities that trigger on damage go on the stack, creatures die, go to the graveyard, and then go to the graveyard effects go on the stack. After this, the combat damage step is over. The next step in combat is the end of combat step. So the first thing that happens is anything that happens in this step written on a card goes on the stack. Then the active player gets priority. So they get to cast whatever, their opponent gets to cast whatever, and then creatures are removed from combat. So if a card requires that a creature be in combat, then you can do it after damage, which is weird. But yeah, you can do things that require combat after damage a lot of the time. Alright, so that is our discussion on combat. And if you found this video useful, then go ahead and click the subscribe button. And you can tune in for our next video, which is the 3rd step, which is post-combat main phase and the end step. Thank you guys for watching. My name is MTG Degree. Oh, wait. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Luke. This has been MTG Degree, and I'll see you next video.